Opening the center immediately, this pawn stake claims crucial central territory, aiming for queenside development and an expansive pawn structure. Asserting central influence immediately, 1. d5 mirrors white's initiative, creating a symmetrical pawn structure ripe for positional maneuvering. Challenging the central pawn immediately, aiming for a space advantage and potential queenside pressure. Solidifying the center, this choice prepares development while respecting white's central presence. Developing a knight here bolsters central influence and prepares for kingside castling. Developing the bishop harmoniously prepares castling and supports the central pawn structure. Opening the d-file dramatically alters the central landscape and invites tactical skirmishes. Releasing the central tension opens lines for development, setting the stage for peace activity. Developing the bishop to f4 establishes immediate pressure along the long diagonal, aiming to contest central control and prepare for kingside castling. Solidifying the central pawn structure with this commitment to c6 offers a stable foundation for future development, though it slightly restricts the queen's diagonal. Solidifying the center and preparing for nf3, white aims to achieve harmonious piece development. Developing the bishop to this square reinforces central control and prepares for queenside expansion. Aggressively pushing the kingside pawn opens avenues, but creates potential weaknesses around your monarch. Re-establishing the diagonal's influence and preparing for potential kingside activity showcases solid positional understanding. Pushing this pawn guards against the bishop's diagonal advance, aiming to create a defensive pawn chain and restrict black's development. Unfurling the knight to f6 reinforces the d5 pawn and prepares for kingside castling, eyeing the open g-file. Developing the bishop to eye the d5 pawn solidifies central control and prepares for potential queenside expansion. Challenging white's central pawn structure aggressively, black immediately opens up lines for their pieces. Developing the knight to a more active central square, preparing to castle and connect the rooks. Developing the knight to c6 solidifies black's central pawn structure and prepares for potential queenside expansion. Displacing the king now sacrifices a tempo, leaving it exposed to potential central pressure and hindering development. Solidifying the kingside structure and preparing to activate the rook is a sensible step in this developing middle game. Securing the king on a safer square, this maneuver prioritizes defensive solidity over immediate central gains, anticipating potential skirmishes. Opening the c-file offers active piece play, but sacrifices pawn structure for a temporary central advantage. Seizing the central pawn allows white to activate its knight, preparing for further development and potentially challenging black's pawn structure. Liberating the queen's bishop from its cramped position on d4, this capture initiates a dynamic pawn structure shift and opens lines for potential attacking play. Opening the central files creates immediate tension and opportunities for both sides to activate their pieces. Reclaiming central space and preparing for kingside expansion, this knight hops back into the fray. Unleashing the queen towards the kingside, white aims to ignite attacking potential and disrupt black's developing harmony. The knight retreats, sacrificing crucial central influence to regroup and defend its vulnerable king. Solidifying the pawn structure aims to gain space on the kingside, though it does weaken the light squares around the monarch. Asserting pressure along the open c-file now, this knight's repositioning aims to exploit the weakened dark squares and potentially disrupt white's queen. Shifting the bishop to a more active diagonal, this maneuver aims to pressure the queen's side and potentially eye dark squares around black's king. Targeting the knight on d4 immediately, this bishop maneuver seeks to disrupt white's central control and potentially open lines for attack. Reinforcing the central e-file now opens avenues for white's rooks, preparing a potential attack against black's uncastled king. Trading the bishop here grants white a clear advantage on the king's side by removing a key defender. Opening the rook to the king's file offers potent attacking prospects and pressures black's newly isolated monarch. Stabilizing the pawn chain offers better defensive coverage for your monarch's sector. Reasserting central pressure, this queen repositioning prepares to exploit the weakened d-file and potentially launch a kingside attack. Reclaiming the knight's central influence prevents white's queenside expansion and prepares for a potential kingside pawn storm. Relocating the rook to the second rank prepares a potential kingside invasion, aiming to exploit the exposed black monarch. The knight's relocation to b6 fortifies the queenside, preparing to contest the open c-file. Reoccupying the central file solidifies control, preparing for potential pawn pushes or piece exchanges with improved coordination. Activating the knight to the advanced outpost on c4 pressurizes white's queenside and offers new attacking avenues. Capturing the bishop trades off white's last active minor piece, simplifying the position and potentially opening lines for black's rook. Reclaiming the open file, black forces white's pieces into a defensive posture, aiming to exploit the weakened central squares. Reclaiming the d-file is paramount for white, aiming to unblock the rook and contest central control. Recentralizing the rook reclaims a vital open file for maneuver and potential counterplay. Securing the rook's advance, this prepares to contest the open c-file and activate further pieces for central influence. Securing the queenside flank against potential infiltration, this maneuver aims to solidify black's position. Clearing the queenside flank, this pawn advance aims to disrupt black's activity and create new avenues for the rook. A bold redeployment, aiming to activate the rook along the nascent half-open file while challenging white's advanced pieces. Attempting to reroute the knight for a better outpost while overlooking the exposed kingside. A clever maneuver to free the knight and create attacking possibilities on the queenside. Asserting central influence, the knight boldly occupies the b2 square, preparing to reinforce the kingside pawn structure and potentially launch an attack along the queenside. Pushing the pawn here aims to gain queenside space, but it could weaken the pawn structure if not properly supported. This repositioning aims to activate the knight on a better diagonal and potentially support a kingside push. Solidifying the kingside pawn structure is crucial given the open e-file, though it does weaken the light squares. Asserting the kingside with a pawn thrust, this aims to disrupt black's queenside counterplay. Re-establishes the bishop's influence on the long diagonal, preparing for potential queenside expansion. Sacrificing the rook opens a critical file, aiming to exploit black's potentially exposed monarch. Exchanging the bishop simplifies the position, opening a path for the rook to become more active. Securing the queen's central placement redirects attacking potential toward the queenside. The bishop now strategically retreats, preparing to recapture the pawns on the queenside should white's king become more exposed. Pushing the g-pawn creates a dangerous outpost for the knight, though it does open lines towards your king. Reactivating the bishop to its post on e6 aims to solidify black's queenside pawn structure and prepare for future kingside action. Shifting the knight to f4 seeks to blockade black's queenside play and potentially prepare a kingside assault. Re-anchoring the bishop to the queenside pawn structure now offers defensive support and potential counterplay along the c-file. Reassessing piece placement, this knight redeploys to a more central hub, eyeing improved influence. Re-establishing the bishop's defense of the kingside pawn structure, this move aims to solidify black's position against white's advancing kingside initiative. The capture opens a pawn chain, aiming to disrupt black's cramped pieces. Reactivating the queen to the center opens up vital attacking possibilities against white's somewhat exposed monarch. The queen's audacious repositioning aims to exploit potential weaknesses on the kingside, a bold gambit for initiative. Trading queens here simplifies the position, potentially favoring black in the upcoming pawn structure battle. The pawns now form a potentially dangerous outpost on the kingside, but will struggle to advance without support. Unlocking the queenside pawn's potential by advancing it on the flank, threatening to disrupt white's defensive setup. Creating a passed pawn on the queen side now that the king side is locked offers a dynamic counterplay. Unlocking the file opens surprising counterplay. Watch the d-pawn's isolation. Seizing the open file aims to create immediate pressure, but sacrifices pawn structure for it. Opening the queen side by capturing the pawn initiates a potential pawn race on the flank. Unlocking the c-file demands vigilance. This knight repositions to pressure the isolated pawn. The bishop sacrifices space to challenge white's active knight on c5. Reactivating the king's defense on the queen side proves prudent, as the opposing bishop eyes vulnerable pawns. Opening the queen side flank with this pawn push creates immediate counterplay and aims to disrupt white's consolidating forces. King's active pursuit begins, seeking a central role in the ensuing pawn exchanges and potential king hunt. Pushing this pawn forward threatens to unravel white's queenside structure and create a passed pawn of its own. The monarch boldly ventures forward, seeking active participation in the endgame skirmish. Chasing the pawn forward opens black's king to decisive pressure on the king side. Repositioning the knight to the center aims to contest the pawn majority and find safer squares. Reclaiming space on the queen side, the rook now eyes the vulnerable pawns. King marches forward, embracing the center of the board, a bold assertion of presence in the unfolding endgame. The king bravely ventures forward, seeking space and activity in this complex endgame. Sacrificing kingside pawn presence, white boldly marches the monarch forward into disputed territory. Trading the bishop here concedes the crucial outpost for white's knight and simplifies into a difficult endgame for black. Recapturing the piece with the rook immediately begins the final endgame sequence. Re-establishing the passed pawn threat on the queen side reignites the positional struggle after the exchanges. Securing the rook on the third rank opens lines for queenside expansion and creates immediate pressure. Recapturing the pawn with the rook re-establishes a potential battery and creates immediate tension on the newly opened file. A calculated risk, the king ventures forth, but the pawn structure is precarious. Snaring the pawn with a regal fork now forces a material exchange, accelerating the endgame. The king boldly ventures into enemy territory, initiating a race against the pawn. Creating a passed pawn on the king side offers a new attacking avenue. Pushing the passed pawn now might be the final gamble to seize initiative. Unleashing the rook's potential, this advance seeks to activate black's passed pawn and disrupt white's pawn structure. Unleashing the passed pawn's potential now is paramount to victory. The rook dances, forcing the king to a precarious square, aiming to disrupt white's pawn structure. Seizing the seventh rank allows for a perpetual check threat, forcing a draw. Advancing the pawn creates immediate pressure on white's king and opens a potential escape square for the black monarch. This pawn push aims to obstruct black's advancing king and potentially open a path for the white king to join the action. Unleashing the rook to the seventh rank creates immediate pawn pressure and challenges white's exposed king. Unleashing the rook's power on the open file, aiming to expose black's compromised king. This rook's infiltration into the seventh rank now threatens white's king and pawn structure, creating immediate tactical complications. The rook finds an open avenue, forcing the king to defend and preventing the pawn's immediate advance.